Marcus Thompson felt the familiar rumble of his 1987 Chevy pickup truck as he drove down Oak Street. The engine sounded perfect after months of careful work. He had spent every weekend for the past year fixing this truck. New engine parts, fresh, paint and clean seats made it look almost new. The radio played soft country music as he drove through the quiet neighborhood. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late spring. The sun was warm but not too hot. Trees lined both sides of the street, their green leaves making shadows on the road. Children played in front yards while their mothers watched from porches. It was the kind of peaceful place where nothing bad ever happened. Marcus was 34 years old and had served 8 years in the Army. He was a sergeant when he left the military 2 years ago. Now he worked as a security guard at a local factory. The job was simple and quiet, which he liked after years of stress in the Army. He lived alone in a small apartment and spent his free time working on his truck or reading books. The truck meant everything to Marcus. His grandfather had owned it first, then his father, and now him. 3 generations of Thompson men had driven this same truck. Marcus remembered riding in it as a boy, sitting next to his grandfather as they drove to the hardware store or fishing pond. When his father died 5 years ago, Marcus inherited the truck. It was rusty and broken then, but he promised himself he would make it run like new again. As Marcus drove past a school playground, he saw children running and laughing. Their joy made him smile. He had always been good with kids, and sometimes thought about becoming a teacher. But for now, he was happy with his simple life. Work during the week, fix the truck on weekends, and visit his mother on Sundays. The neighborhood was called Maple Heights. Most of the houses were small but well kept. People here worked hard for what they had. They cut their grass, painted their fences, and knew their neighbors' names. It was the kind of place where people still waved when they saw each other. Marcus liked driving through here because it reminded him of the town where he grew up. He was thinking about what to make for dinner when he saw the flashing lights in his mirror. Red and blue lights filled the back window of his truck. Marcus felt his heart beat faster, but he stayed calm. He had done nothing wrong. He was driving the speed limit and had stopped at every stop sign. His truck was legal, his license was good, and he had insurance. Marcus pulled over to the side of the road and turned off his engine. He put both hands on the steering wheel where they could be seen. This was something they taught soldiers. Always. Keep your hands visible when dealing with police. Never make quick movements. Stay calm and follow orders. The police car stopped behind him. Marcus could see 2 officers inside. They sat in their car for several minutes before getting out. Marcus wondered what they were doing. Usually, police officers got out right away to talk to drivers they had stopped. When the officers finally got out of their car, Marcus could see them in his side mirror. Both were white men, probably in their 30s. One was tall and thin with dark hair. The other was shorter and heavier with light brown hair. They both wore dark sunglasses even though the sun was not very bright. The tall officer walked to the driver's side of Marcus's truck. The shorter officer went to the passenger side. This seemed strange to Marcus. Usually only one officer talked to the driver while the other stayed back. Having officers on both sides made him feel trapped. The tall officer tapped on Marcus's window with his knuckle. Marcus rolled it down slowly. "License and registration," the officer said. His voice was cold and unfriendly. He did not say hello or explain why he had stopped Marcus. "Yes, sir," Marcus said quietly. He reached slowly for his wallet, making sure. The officer could see his movements. "My registration is in the glove box. Is it okay if I get it?" "Hurry up," the officer said. Marcus got his license from his wallet and handed it to the officer. Then he reached across to open the glove box. The shorter officer on the passenger side stepped closer to the window, watching Marcus's every move. "Here you go, officer," Marcus said, handing over his registration and insurance card. The tall officer looked at the papers but did not really read them. He seemed more interested in looking inside the truck. His eyes moved over the seats, the dashboard, and the floor. "Step out of the vehicle," the officer said. Marcus felt confused. He had done nothing wrong, and the officer had not explained why he was stopped. But arguing with police was never a good idea. Marcus had learned that in the Army and from growing up as a black man in America. "Can you tell me what I did wrong?" Marcus asked politely as he opened his door. "Just get out," the shorter officer said from the other side of the truck. His voice was loud and angry. Marcus got out of his truck and stood next to the door. He kept his hands where both officers could see them. The tall officer was about the same height as Marcus, but the shorter one had to look up at him. Marcus was 6 feet tall and still in good shape from his Army training. "Turn around and put your hands on the truck," the tall officer said. "Officer, I don't understand what's happening," Marcus said. "I was just driving home from work. I wasn't speeding or doing anything wrong." I said, "Turn around," the officer repeated, his voice getting louder. Marcus did as he was told. He faced his truck and put his hands flat against the side. The metal was warm from the sun. He could smell the fresh wax he had put on the truck last weekend. The tall officer began, searching Marcus's pockets while the shorter officer watched. Marcus felt the officer's hands going through his pants pockets and jacket. It felt wrong and embarrassing, especially with neighbors starting to come out of their houses to watch. "What's this?" the tall officer asked, pulling Marcus's wallet out again. "That's my wallet," Marcus said. The officer opened it and looked through everything inside. He found Marcus's driver's license, his military ID card, his veteran's card, and some cash. He also found a business card from Marcus's job and a photo of Marcus's mother. "You're military?" the shorter officer asked, looking at the ID cards. "I was in the Army," Marcus said. "I got out 2 years ago." The officers looked at each other. Marcus could not see their faces, but something passed between them. The tall officer put the wallet back in Marcus's pocket. "Your truck matches the description of a vehicle involved in a robbery," the tall officer said. Marcus felt shocked. His truck was not involved in any robbery. He had been at work all day and had the time card to prove it. "There must be some mistake," Marcus said. "I work at Johnson Manufacturing. I've been there since 8 this morning. You can call my boss." "Sure you were," the shorter officer said with a laugh that was not friendly. Marcus realized that no matter what he said, these officers had already decided he was guilty of something. He remembered what his father had taught him years ago. Sometimes the best thing to do is stay quiet and let lawyers sort things out later. Fighting with police. Officers on the street never ended well for men who looked like Marcus. So Marcus decided to say nothing more. He would cooperate but not speak unless asked a direct question. He would watch and remember everything that happened. If these officers wanted to play games, Marcus would let them. But he would not make it easy for them. The spring air felt cool against his face as he stood next to his truck, hands against the warm metal, waiting to see what would happen next. The tall officer walked around Marcus's truck like a hunter circling his prey. He looked through the windows, checking the front seat, the back seat, and the truck bed. The shorter officer stayed close to Marcus, watching his every breath. "We need to search your vehicle," the tall officer announced. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He knew they had no right to search his truck without his permission or a warrant. But he also knew that fighting them here on the street would only make things worse. "Do you have a warrant?" Marcus asked quietly. The shorter officer laughed. "We don't need a warrant when we have probable cause. Your truck matches a robbery suspect's vehicle." Marcus wanted to ask what robbery, when it happened, and what the real suspect's truck looked like. But he could see that these officers were not interested in facts. They had made up their minds about something, and Marcus was caught in the middle of it. "I do not give permission to search my truck," Marcus said clearly. He wanted to make sure any witnesses could hear him. "Noted," the tall officer said, but he opened the driver's door anyway. Marcus watched helplessly as the officer began going through his truck. First, he opened the glove box and dumped everything onto the ground. Papers scattered in the wind. Marcus's truck manual, insurance papers, and some receipts flew across the sidewalk. A neighbor's dog ran over and sniffed at the papers. The officer then moved to the area under the seats. He pulled out floor mats and threw them aside. He found a tire pressure gauge, some coins, and an old coffee cup. Everything went on to the ground like trash. Next, the officer opened the center console between the seats. Inside were some pens, a small notebook, and Marcus's garage door opener. The officer looked through the notebook, reading Marcus's personal notes about truck repairs and grocery lists. He seemed disappointed that he found nothing suspicious. The shorter officer joined in the search. He went to the back of the truck and lowered the tailgate with a loud bang. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. More people came out of their houses to watch. Some stood on their porches, while others walked closer to see what was happening. In the truck bed, Marcus kept his tools. He had a toolbox full of wrenches, screwdrivers, and other equipment he used to fix his truck. The shorter officer opened the toolbox and began throwing tools onto the street. Metal clanged against the pavement as expensive tools scattered everywhere. "These look like burglary tools," the shorter officer said, holding up a crowbar. "Those are mechanics' tools," Marcus replied. "I use them to work on my truck." "Sure you do," the officer said with a smirk. Marcus felt anger building inside him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry would only give these officers an excuse to hurt him. He had seen what happened to other men who lost their temper with police. The tall officer was now searching behind the seats of the truck. He found a small bag containing Marcus's Army medals and certificates. Marcus had been taking them to his mother's house to show her his commendation letters. She liked to read them when she felt proud of her son. The officer opened the bag and looked at the medals. For a moment, his face seemed to soften. Marcus thought maybe seeing the military awards would remind the officer that Marcus had served his country. Maybe it would make him realize that Marcus was not a criminal. Instead, the officer's face hardened again. He took the certificates out of the bag and let them blow in the wind. One landed in a puddle of water from a sprinkler. Another got caught in a bush. Marcus's heart broke watching his achievements scattered like garbage. "Fake medals," the officer said loudly, making sure the neighbors could hear. "Probably bought them at a pawn shop." The words hit Marcus like a punch. He had earned every one of those medals through hard work and sacrifice. He had served in dangerous places and done difficult jobs to protect his country. Now this man was calling his service fake in front of strangers. But Marcus said nothing. He bit his tongue and watched as years of memories were treated like trash. The officers became more destructive as they searched. The shorter officer opened Marcus's console and spilled coffee from an old cup onto the seat. The brown liquid soaked into the fabric that Marcus had just cleaned last week. The officer claimed it was an accident, but Marcus saw the small smile on his face. The tall officer was searching under the dashboard now. He pulled at wires and knocked loose some plastic panels. Marcus heard cracking sounds as parts of his restored interior broke. Each sound felt like a nail in his heart. In the truck bed, the shorter officer was now checking the spare tire. Marcus kept it mounted under the truck bed in a special holder. The officer could not figure out how to lower it properly, so he used his knife to cut the cable. The tire fell to the ground with a heavy thud. "Oops," the officer said, not sounding sorry at all. Then he took his knife and made a long cut in the side of the tire. Air hissed out as the tire went flat. Marcus's spare tire was now ruined. If he got a flat tire on the way home, he would be stranded. "Found something suspicious in this tire," the officer announced. "Could have been hiding drugs or weapons." There had been nothing in the tire except air, and everyone watching knew it. But the officer acted like he had discovered something important. The search continued for 30 more minutes. The officers went through everything twice, making bigger messes each time. They pulled apart Marcus's first aid kit and scattered bandages in the street. They opened his bottle of water and poured it out, claiming they needed to test it for alcohol. By now, at least 20 neighbors were watching. Some looked angry at what they were seeing. Others seemed scared. A few people were recording with their phones, but they tried to hide it from the officers. Marcus's truck looked like it had been hit by a tornado. Tools were scattered everywhere. Papers blew in the wind. His seats were stained with coffee. Parts of his dashboard hung loose. The spare tire was flat and useless, but the worst part was not the damage to his truck. The worst part was how the officers talked about him to each other, as if he could not hear them. "Another one of those broken soldiers," the tall officer said. "They come back from war all messed up in the head." "Yeah," the shorter officer agreed. "Probably has PTSD or something. That's why he's acting so weird and quiet." "These military guys think they're better than everyone else," the tall officer continued. "Think their service makes them special." Marcus felt each word like a slap. He was not broken or messed up. He did not think he was better than anyone. He was just a man trying to live a quiet life and fix up his grandfather's truck. But these officers saw him as a problem to be solved, not a person to be respected. The search was clearly finished. The officers had found nothing because there was nothing to find. Marcus had no drugs, no weapons, no stolen property, and no evidence of any crime. His truck was clean, and so was he. But instead of apologizing for the mistake, the officers seemed angry that they had found nothing. They looked at the mess they had made and then looked at Marcus as if it was somehow his fault. "Clean this up," the tall officer said, pointing at the scattered tools and papers. Marcus looked at the destruction around his truck. Oil from his broken tools was staining the street. His personal papers were blowing away in the wind. His military certificates were dirty and torn. "Am I free to go?" Marcus asked. The officers looked at each other again. Marcus could see they were not finished with him yet. They had destroyed his truck and found nothing. Now they seemed to be deciding what to do next. The spring afternoon that had started so peaceful was turning into something much darker. Marcus stood next to his ruined truck, still saying nothing, still waiting to see how much worse things could get. The two officers stood looking at the mess they had made around Marcus's truck. Tools were scattered across the street. Papers were still blowing in the wind. The spare tire lay flat and useless on the sidewalk. but they had found nothing illegal, nothing suspicious, and nothing that connected Marcus to any crime. Marcus could see the frustration growing in their faces. They had been so sure they would find something. Now they looked foolish in front of all the neighbors who were watching. Some people were still recording with their phones, and the officers knew it. "Turn around," the tall officer said to Marcus. "Put your hands behind your back." Marcus felt his heart sink. "What are the charges?" he asked quietly. "Resisting arrest," the shorter officer said with a mean smile. "I haven't resisted anything," Marcus replied. "I've done everything you asked." "You resisted when you questioned our right to search your vehicle," the tall officer said. "That's resisting in my book." Marcus knew this was not true. Asking for a warrant was not resisting arrest. It was his legal right. But he also knew that arguing would only make things worse. These officers had already decided to arrest him, and nothing he said would change their minds. The tall officer pulled out his handcuffs. They were metal and looked cold and hard. Marcus had seen handcuffs before in the army when they arrested prisoners, but he never thought he would wear them himself. "This is wrong," said a voice from the crowd of neighbors. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, an older woman who lived 3 houses down. "This man did nothing wrong. We all saw it." "Ma'am, please step back," the shorter officer said. "This is police business." "This is not police business," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice getting louder. "This is harassment. That young man was just driving down our street, minding his own business." Other neighbors started speaking up too. A man with gray hair said the officers had no right to search the truck. A young mother holding a baby said she was going to file a complaint. An elderly black man just shook his head and said, "Not again." The officers did not like the attention from the crowd. They wanted to do their job without witnesses questioning them. The tall officer grabbed Marcus's right arm and pulled it behind his back. The metal handcuff clicked around his wrist. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began, but his voice was rushed and angry. He clearly did not want to be there anymore. Marcus felt the cold metal against his skin. The handcuffs were tight, cutting into his wrists. The officer grabbed his left arm and pulled it back roughly. Marcus winced but did not cry out. He would not give these men the satisfaction of seeing him in pain. As the second handcuff clicked shut, Marcus thought about his grandfather. The old man had lived through worse than this. He had faced discrimination and unfair treatment his whole life, but he never let it break his spirit. He taught Marcus to be strong, to be patient, and to trust that justice would come eventually. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law, the officer continued, still rushing through the words. More neighbors came out of their houses. Word was spreading quickly through the neighborhood that something was wrong. People who had been cooking dinner or watching TV now stood on their porches, looking upset and confused. A teenage boy with a smartphone was recording everything. He held the phone high so he could see over the crowd. The shorter officer noticed him and walked over. "Put that phone away," the officer demanded. "I'm on public property," the boy said. "I have the right to record." "Not when you're interfering with police business," the officer replied. "I'm not interfering with anything," the boy said. "I'm just standing here." The officer looked like he wanted to take the phone, but too many people were watching. Instead, he just glared at the boy and walked back to Marcus. "You have the right to an attorney," the tall officer continued. "If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you." Marcus listened to the familiar words. He had heard them in movies and TV shows, but hearing them directed at him felt surreal. An hour ago, he had been driving home from work thinking about dinner. Now he was being arrested for crimes he did not commit. The officers led Marcus toward their police car. Walking with handcuffs was harder than he expected. His arms were pulled behind his back, and the metal cut into his wrists with every step. The officers did not seem to care about his comfort. As they walked past his truck, Marcus looked at the damage one more time. His beautiful restoration project was ruined. The seats were stained, the dashboard was broken, and his tools were scattered. Like garbage, it would take months and hundreds of dollars to fix everything. But worse than the damage to his truck was the damage to his dignity. His neighbors had watched him get searched and arrested like a common criminal. His military awards were lying, dirty in the street. His reputation in this peaceful neighborhood was probably destroyed. "What's your problem anyway?" the shorter officer asked as they walked. "Why won't you talk? You think you're too good to answer our questions?" Marcus said nothing. He had learned in the army that sometimes silence was the best weapon. Let the enemy talk. Let them reveal their plans and their weaknesses. Say nothing that could be used against you later. "I think he's one of those PTSD cases," the tall officer said to his partner. "They come back from war all weird and quiet, can't handle normal society." "Yeah," the shorter officer agreed. "Probably dangerous, too. Good thing we got him off the street before he hurt someone." Marcus felt anger burning in his chest, but he kept his face calm. These men knew nothing about PTSD or the military or what veterans went through. They were just using his service as an excuse to justify their behavior. When they reached the police car, the tall officer opened the back door. The inside smelled like disinfectant and fear. The seats were hard plastic, and there was a metal barrier between the front and back seats. "Watch your head," the officer said, but he pushed Marcus down roughly anyway. Marcus's head bumped against the top of the door frame. The back seat of a police car was designed to be uncomfortable. There were no handles on the inside of the doors. No way to roll down the windows and no way to escape. The handcuffs made it impossible to sit comfortably. Marcus had to lean forward to keep the metal from cutting deeper into his wrists. Through the window, he could see his neighbors still standing around his truck. Some were trying to collect his scattered papers. Others were taking pictures of the damage. Mrs. Rodriguez was talking loudly to anyone who would listen about how wrong this was. The officers got into the front seat and started the car. The engine was loud, and the radio crackled with police codes and conversations. The shorter officer was talking into his radio, reporting that they had made an arrest. "Unit 47 to dispatch," he said. "We have one in custody, African American, male, mid-30s, possible mental health issues. Mental health issues." Marcus almost laughed at the irony. The only mental health issue here was the sickness that made these officers think they could destroy a man's life without consequences. As the police car pulled away from the curb, Marcus took one last look at his truck. It sat there like a wounded animal, broken and abandoned. All his hard work, all his memories, all his grandfather's legacy was scattered in the street. But Marcus was not broken. Not yet. He sat quietly in the back of the police car. His mind, working like a computer, he was remembering everything. The officers' names and badge numbers, the exact time everything happened, the witnesses who saw it all. The illegal search, the false arrest, the damaged property. These officers thought they had won. They thought they had intimidated another citizen into submission. They thought their badges and guns made them untouchable. They had no idea who they were dealing with. The police car drove through the peaceful neighborhood, past houses where families were sitting down for dinner. Children played in yards while their parents watched from porches. It was the kind of normal life that Marcus had fought to protect when he served his country. Now he was the one who needed protection. But Marcus was not worried. He had been in worse situations than this. He had faced real enemies with real weapons in real danger. 2 corrupt cops in a small town were nothing compared to what he had survived before. The car turned onto Main Street, heading toward the police station. Marcus closed his eyes and began to plan. He had one phone call coming, and he knew exactly who to call. These officers had made a big mistake. They had picked the wrong man on the wrong day. Soon they would learn just how wrong they had been. The police station was a small brick building on Main Street, built in the 1960s when the town was much smaller. It looked tired and old, with brown stains on the walls and broken tiles in the parking lot. A few police cars sat outside, along with an old van that looked like it had not moved in years. The tall officer parked near the front door and turned off the engine. Through the windshield, Marcus could see a sign that said, Millbrook Police. Department serving and protecting since 1952. The words looked faded and worn, like everything else about this place. End of the line, the shorter officer said, turning around to look at Marcus through the metal barrier. Marcus said nothing. He had not spoken since asking about the charges, and he was not going to start now. His silence seemed to irritate the officers more than anything else he could have done. The officers got out and opened Marcus's door. The handcuffs had cut off some blood flow to his hands, making his fingers feel numb and cold. Standing up was difficult with his arms pulled behind his back, but Marcus managed without asking for help. Inside the police station, the air smelled like old coffee and cigarettes. The walls were painted a sick green color that reminded Marcus of hospitals. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making everything look harsh and unfriendly. Behind a desk sat a heavy-set man with gray hair and sergeant stripes on his uniform. He looked up when the officers brought Marcus in. His name tag said SGT Williams, and he had the tired look of someone who had been doing this job for a long time. What do we have here? Sergeant Williams asked. Traffic stop turned into an arrest, the tall officer said. Subject was driving a vehicle matching the description of one used in a robbery. When we searched his truck, he became belligerent and resistant. Marcus wanted to speak up and correct the lies, but he kept his mouth shut. Everything these officers said was being recorded, and their lies would only help his case later. What robbery? Sergeant Williams asked. The tall officer hesitated. The one from last week. The convenience store on Elm Street. Sergeant Williams frowned and checked his computer. The robbery from last week? The suspect in that case was driving a red Honda Civic. This man was in a Chevrolet pickup truck. The 2 officers looked at each other. Marcus could see them trying to think of another excuse. Well, there might have been other robberies, the shorter officer said weakly. Sergeant Williams looked at them like they were children who had been caught lying. His eyes moved to Marcus, taking in his calm posture and the way he stood quietly despite being handcuffed. What's your name, son? The sergeant asked Marcus. Marcus Thompson, Marcus replied. It was the first time he had spoken since arriving at the station. Military? The sergeant asked, noticing something in Marcus's posture. Yes, sir. Army. 8 years. Sergeant Williams nodded slowly. Marcus could see recognition in the older man's eyes. The sergeant had probably served in the military too, or at least knew other veterans. There was a way that soldiers carried themselves, and Sergeant Williams had spotted it. Take the cuffs off him, the sergeant ordered. But he's under arrest, the tall officer protested. For what exactly? Sergeant Williams asked. You said he was driving a truck that matched a robbery suspect. But the robbery suspect drove a Honda. You said he was belligerent, but he's been nothing but polite since he walked in here. The shorter officer stepped forward. He was resisting arrest. He questioned our authority to search his vehicle. Asking for a warrant is not resisting arrest, Sergeant Williams said firmly. It's his constitutional right. Now take those handcuffs off. Reluctantly, the tall officer unlocked Marcus's handcuffs. Marcus rubbed his wrists where the metal had cut into his skin. Red marks showed where the cuffs had been too tight. Mr. Weiss. Thompson, Sergeant Williams said, you have the right to make a phone call. Would you like to do that now? Yes, sir, Marcus said quietly. The sergeant pointed to an old black phone on a table near the wall. You can use that one. Take your time. Marcus walked to the phone while the two officers stood nearby, watching him. He could feel their eyes on his back as he picked up the receiver. The phone was old and heavy, the kind they used to make before. Everything became digital. Marcus dialed a number from memory. It was not his lawyer or his family or his boss. It was a number he had memorized during his military training, a number he never thought he would need to use. The phone rang twice before someone answered. Colonel Martinez speaking. Sir, this is Agent Thompson. Authorization code Delta 779. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus could hear computer keys clicking as Colonel Martinez looked up his information. Thompson, what's your status? The colonel asked. I've been compromised, sir. Local police arrested me during my surveillance operation. They searched my vehicle and destroyed my cover materials. Marcus spoke quietly, but his voice was clear and professional. Behind him, he could hear the two officers talking to Sergeant Williams, but he focused on his phone call. What's your location? Colonel, Martinez asked. Millbrook Police Department, 425 Main Street. Badge numbers of arresting officers are 247 and 189. Understood. Are you injured? No, sir. Minor cuts from handcuffs, but nothing serious. Stay put and maintain your cover. Do not reveal your true status to anyone. We'll handle this from here. Yes, sir. Thompson? Yes, sir. Good work. You just gave us everything we need. The phone went dead. Marcus hung up and turned around. The two officers were still talking to Sergeant Williams, but their voices were getting louder. They seemed upset about something. I need to process him, the tall officer was saying. He's under arrest. For what crime? Sergeant Williams asked again. You haven't given me a single valid charge. Suspicious behavior, the shorter officer said. That's not a crime, the sergeant replied. Marcus walked back toward them, keeping his expression neutral. The phone call had lasted less than 2 minutes, but everything was different now. Help was coming, and these officers had no idea what they had just done. Did you reach someone? Sergeant Williams asked. Yes, sir, Marcus said. The tall officer looked frustrated. Who did you call? Your lawyer? Marcus looked at him calmly. Someone who can help. For the next 20 minutes, the officers tried to figure out what to do with Marcus. They wanted to put him in a cell, but Sergeant Williams would not let them without proper charges. They wanted to question him, but Marcus just sat quietly and said nothing. The shorter officer kept pacing around the room like a caged animal. He seemed to know that something was wrong, but he could not figure out what it was. The tall officer sat at a desk, filling out paperwork and making up stories about why they had arrested Marcus. Sergeant Williams kept looking at Marcus with curious eyes. He seemed to sense that there was more to this situation than met the eye. Several times he started to ask Marcus a question, then stopped himself. The old clock on the wall ticked loudly in the quiet room. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the dirty windows. It had been almost an hour since Marcus made his phone call. Then the front door of the police station opened, and everything changed. A woman in a dark suit walked in, followed by two men in similar clothing. They all had the confident walk of federal agents, and they all looked very serious. The woman was about 40 years old, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Agent Sarah Chen, FBI," she said, showing her badge to Sergeant Williams. "We need to speak with Marcus Thompson immediately." The two arresting officers looked confused and scared. They had expected Marcus to call a lawyer or maybe his family. They never expected federal agents to show up. "Is he in some kind of federal trouble?" the tall officer asked. Agent Chen looked at him with cold eyes. "You could say that," she replied, "but not the kind you think." Marcus stood up from his chair, still saying nothing. Agent Chen nodded to him slightly, a tiny gesture that no one else noticed. "Mr. Thompson," she said formally, "you need to come with us." "Wait a minute," the shorter officer said. "He's under arrest. He's not going anywhere." Agent Chen turned to face him. "Officer, what's your name?" "Patrolman Davis, badge number 189. "Well, Officer Davis, Mr. Thompson is no longer under arrest. Any charges against him are being dropped immediately." "You can't do that," the tall officer protested. "This is our jurisdiction." "Actually," Agent Chen said with a slight smile, "we can do exactly that. Mr. Thompson is a federal agent working on a classified operation. You just arrested a federal officer in the line of duty." The blood drained from both officers' faces. They looked at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time. The quiet, polite man they had arrested was not what he seemed. Sergeant Williams leaned back in his chair and whistled softly. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. Agent Chen walked over to Marcus. "Are you all right?" she asked quietly. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied. "They roughed up my truck pretty good, but I'm fine." "We'll take care of the truck," she said. Then she turned to face the two officers. "Gentlemen, you're going to want to call your union representative. You're going to need a lawyer." The shorter officer's voice cracked when he spoke. "We didn't know. How could we know?" "You could have known by doing your job properly," Agent Chen said. "Instead, you conducted an illegal search, destroyed federal property, and arrested a federal agent without cause." Marcus finally allowed himself a small smile. The atmosphere in the police station changed completely when Agent Chen spoke those words. The two officers who had been so confident an hour before now looked pale and frightened. Officer Davis, the shorter one, was actually shaking. Officer Martinez, the tall one, sat down heavily in a chair as if his legs could no longer hold him up. "Federal agent?" Officer Davis whispered. "But he's just he works at a factory." "That's his cover," Agent Chen explained coldly. "Marcus Thompson is a military intelligence officer working undercover for a joint federal task force. His factory job, his apartment, his truck, everything was part of a carefully planned operation." Sergeant Williams leaned forward in his chair, suddenly very interested. "What kind of operation?" Agent Chen looked at him with respect. Unlike the other two officers, Sergeant Williams had treated Marcus properly from the moment he arrived. "We've been investigating corruption in local police departments, reports of illegal searches, false arrests, planted evidence, and violations of civil rights." Marcus finally spoke up. "My drive through Maple Heights was not random. We had reports that officers in this department were targeting African American drivers for harassment. I was conducting surveillance to document their behavior." The truth hit the two officers like a truck. They had been watched, tested, and they had failed completely. Every illegal thing they had done was now evidence against them. "You recorded everything?" Officer Martinez asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Body cameras, dashboard cameras, and surveillance equipment hidden in my truck. Marcus confirmed. Plus all the witnesses in the neighborhood who filmed you with their phones. Agent. Chen pulled out her phone and showed them a video. It was security footage from a house across the street, showing the entire traffic stop from beginning to end. The officers could see themselves destroying Marcus's truck, throwing his military medals around, and arresting him without cause. This footage, along with Marcus's testimony, gives us enough evidence for multiple federal charges, Agent Chen said. Civil rights violations, illegal search and seizure, destruction of federal property, assault on a federal officer, and interference. With a federal investigation, Officer Davis started crying. Actual tears ran down his face as he realized his career was over. "We didn't know," he kept saying. "We couldn't have known." You shouldn't have to know someone is a federal agent to treat them with basic human decency, Marcus said quietly. Every citizen deserves the same respect you should have shown me. The front door of the station opened again and more people walked in. First came Police Chief Robert Kelly, a tall man with white hair who looked very angry. Behind him came 2 more FBI agents and a man in a military uniform with colonel's insignia. "Colonel Martinez," Marcus said, standing up and saluting. "At ease, Agent Thompson," the colonel replied, returning the salute. "Good work today. Your report gave us everything we needed to move forward with this investigation." Chief Kelly looked around the room, taking in the scene. His eyes stopped on the 2 officers who had arrested Marcus. "Davis, Martinez. In my office, now." "Chief, we can explain," Officer Martinez started to say. "Explain what?" Chief Kelly snapped. "Explain how you arrested a federal agent? Explain how you conducted an illegal search? Explain how you destroyed evidence and violated someone's civil rights?" The chief's voice was getting louder with each word. Marcus could see that he was not just angry about the legal problems this would cause. He was angry about the shame it brought to his department. "Sir, his truck matched the description," Officer Davis tried to explain. "What description?" Chief Kelly demanded. "I checked our records. There was no robbery reported today. There was no BOLO alert for any vehicle. You made that up." The room fell silent except for the buzzing of the fluorescent lights overhead. The 2 officers had been caught in their lie, and everyone knew it. Agent Chen stepped forward. "Chief Kelly, we appreciate your cooperation with this investigation. Your department is not the target here. These 2 officers were acting on their own." "I understand," Chief Kelly said. "But they were wearing my department's uniform when they did it. That makes it my responsibility." One of the FBI agents handed Chief Kelly a stack of papers. "These are federal arrest warrants for Officers Davis and Martinez. They're being charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, conspiracy to violate civil rights, and obstruction of a federal investigation." Marcus watched as federal agents moved behind the 2 officers. The same men who had handcuffed him an hour ago were now having handcuffs put on their own wrists. Officer Davis was still crying. Officer Martinez looked like he was in shock. "You have the right to remain silent," one of the FBI agents said as he cuffed Officer Davis. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." It was the same speech the officers had given Marcus, but now the roles were reversed. Marcus felt no joy in watching them get arrested, only sadness that it had come to this. These men had chosen to abuse their power, and now they would face the consequences. Sergeant Williams walked over to Marcus. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have stopped this before it went so far." "You treated me with respect when I got here," Marcus replied. "That's more than they did." "Still," the sergeant said, I knew something was wrong. I should have trusted my instincts. Colonel, Martinez joined the conversation. Sergeant, your behavior tonight will be noted in our report. You showed professionalism and integrity under difficult circumstances. Agent Chen was talking on her phone, arranging for Marcus's truck to be towed to a federal facility where it could be repaired. The government would pay for all the damage, but Marcus knew it would never be quite the same. Some things, once broken, could never be fully fixed. What happens now? Marcus asked Colonel Martinez. You'll be reassigned to a different operation, the colonel said. Your cover here is blown, obviously, but you did excellent work. Your evidence will help us clean up several other departments that have similar problems. Marcus nodded. He had known this assignment would be dangerous, but he never expected it to end this way. He had been prepared for violence or threats, not for the complete stupidity of two corrupt officers. Will there be a trial? Marcus asked. Almost certainly, Agent Chen said, finishing her phone call. Your testimony will be crucial. The video evidence is strong, but having you explain what happened will seal the case. The two arrested officers were being led out of the station in handcuffs. Officer Davis was still crying, but Officer Martinez walked with his head down, looking defeated. Their police careers were over, and they might spend years in federal prison. Chief Kelly shook his head as he watched them go. 23 years I've been running this department, he said to no one in particular. Never had anything like this happen before. Unfortunately, it happens more than you might think, Agent Chen replied. That's why we do these operations. Most officers are good people doing a hard job, but the bad ones need to be stopped. Marcus thought about the neighbors who had witnessed his arrest. They had seen him get handcuffed and taken away like a criminal. Tomorrow, they would read in the newspaper that he was actually a federal agent who had been investigating police corruption. He wondered what they would think about that. Can I go back to get my personal things from the truck? Marcus asked. The truck is already being loaded onto a trailer, Agent Chen said. We'll make sure you get everything back after we process it for evidence. Marcus remembered his grandfather's tools scattered on the street, his military medals lying in puddles, his personal papers blowing in the wind. The neighbors had tried to collect what they could, but some things were probably lost forever. There's something else, Colonel Martinez said. The media is going to pick up this story. A federal agent arrested by corrupt cops makes good headlines. Are you prepared for that? Marcus had not thought about reporters and news cameras. He preferred to work quietly, behind the scenes. But he understood that sometimes the truth needed to be told publicly. Whatever helps the case, Marcus said. Agent Chen handed him a business card. Call me if any reporters bother you. We'll handle the media relations. Your job is to rest and prepare for the trial. As they prepared to leave the police station, Sergeant Williams stopped Marcus one more time. For what it's worth, he said, I'm proud to have met you. What you did took real courage. I just did my job, Marcus replied. No, the sergeant said. You did a lot more than that. Outside the police station, several news vans were already arriving. Word of the arrests had leaked out and reporters were setting up cameras. Agent Chen led Marcus to a black SUV parked away from the cameras. We'll take you to a safe house for tonight, she said. Tomorrow we'll debrief you and start preparing for the legal proceedings. As they drove away from the police station, Marcus looked back one more time. The building looked small and ordinary. Nothing like the place where his life had just changed forever. Two corrupt officers were now facing federal charges because they had chosen to pick on the wrong person. Marcus thought about his grandfather. Again. The old man had always said that truth and justice would win in the end, even when things looked hopeless. Today had proved him right.